Okay, so today we're diving into the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. And it's a story straight from the headlines with some really gripping details. Drone footage, we've got a year on the run, really the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, it's a development that could completely change the conflict. And, understanding what could happen because of this is exactly why you're here listening to this deep dive.
You got it. We've got reports from The Guardian,
Mm.
analysis from CNN, and what they show is both kind of tragic, but honestly a little unsettling.
Yeah, no denying this is a huge deal. But to really understand what this means, we need to take a step back. Sinwar wasn't just any Hamas leader.
Right. He was the mastermind behind that attack on Israel in 2023, the one that really made things worse, right?
Exactly, and that's what made him the #1 target for Israel. Imagine that pressure constantly being hunted. The Guardian is reporting that he spent a whole year in hiding, like completely off the grid.
Off the grid, like he ditched his phone and was living in the shadows.
Mm.
More than that, no phone calls, no emails. He was completely invisible online. He knew that Israeli intelligence was working nonstop to find him, and he was serious about staying one step ahead.
So that makes it even crazier that they finally got him.
And that's where things get even more interesting. Israeli forces were doing what they're calling a routine operation in Rafah, which is in southern Gaza, and somehow that led them straight to Sinwar.
Hold on, routine. What does routine even mean in a place like Gaza right now?
That's the million-dollar question. And the answer is honestly pretty unclear. Israel isn't giving out too many details, but they're saying that their troops ran into some resistance and then things escalated. And that's how they say they found Sinwar hiding in a damaged building.
Okay, so either Israel got really lucky or they knew more than they're letting on.
Exactly. And that's where all these different opinions come in. Some experts are saying that maybe they were tracking Sinwar's every move more than we thought. Like maybe he messed up just for a second and Israel was ready to pounce. So maybe not just luck, but like something planned out.
No.
But Sinwar was a leader, right?
Yeah,
He wasn't some soldier on the front lines you'd find in a shootout.
that's a really important point. To understand how this happened, you have to understand what kind of person Sinwar was. He wasn't born into power. He came from nothing. Born in a refugee camp, joined Hamas in the 80s. He worked his way up through pure willpower.
And then he was in prison, right? Didn't he spend decades locked up?
More than 20 years in Israeli prisons, to be exact. But here's the really interesting part. Sinwar didn't just sit there in prison. He used that time to study his captors, learning their language, how they think, what makes them weak.
He learned Hebrew.
Fluent, from what I've read. Think about that, 2 decades inside your enemy's prison. Not just doing time, but mastering their language, figuring out their tactics.
He basically turned his prison cell into a classroom.
Exactly. And that experience changed him. He got out of prison not just tougher, but smarter and way more dangerous.
And he used all of that when he became the leader of Hamas in Gaza.
Absolutely. He strengthened their relationships with other countries, made their military stronger, and ultimately planned that attack in 2023 that put him on Israel's radar.
So you're saying we had this like brilliant, almost scary strategist, always one step ahead, and then suddenly he's trapped. Feels like something out of a movie.
Yeah, it's definitely a tragic story. And what makes it even weirder is that footage the Israeli military put out, they say it shows the last moments of Sinwar's life.
I've heard about that. It's from a drone, right?
Right. It shows one guy by himself, obviously hurt, stuck inside this building that looks like it's been bombed. The Guardian hasn't been able to confirm if it's real yet, but it's creepy to watch.
Like, what exactly does it show?
So the figure Israel says it's Sinwar is throwing something at the drone. It looks like a piece of trash or a stick. Like, it's almost sad he's using that against this drone flying above him. Then the video cuts off. And according to the IDF, that's when they fired again, making the building fall on top of him and killing him.
I don't know how to feel about that. On one hand, you think about him like being so defiant when he knew he was going to die, but then you think about how awful and desperate those last seconds must have been.
It really reminds you how real this conflict is and how many people are suffering because of it. And that brings us to why we're even talking about this, what comes next.
Exactly. This isn't just about one man. Sinwar dying changes everything what happens to Hamas, to Gaza.
That's the big question. Sinwar was the one who held Hamas together. He was a genius, and people respected him, even feared him. Now that he's gone, someone has to take his place.
And someone always will.
You're right. And the question is who and what will they do with Hamas? Will they break up into smaller groups, all fighting for power? Will a new, even more extreme leader come out of this?
CNN is reporting that some experts think Sinwar was actually keeping things from getting worse, and that now that he's gone, Hamas might do things that are more unpredictable, maybe even more violent.
Yeah, that could definitely happen. There's also the chance of revenge. Hamas has a history of hitting back hard when they lose important people.
Which just keeps this whole cycle of violence going. And what about all the people stuck in the middle of all of this? The people just trying to live in Gaza, the hostages.
Their futures are even less certain now. President Biden has been pushing for everyone to stop fighting, and Sinwar's death has made that even more urgent. But it's really up in the air if it will actually change anything.
Biden even talked about a possible day after for Hamas, whatever that means. He also got on the phone with Netanyahu right after it happened. It feels like the whole world is holding its breath.
And they should be. This conflict impacts everyone. But while everyone's focused on the politics, we can't forget about the people actually living through this. The people in Gaza are dealing with a full-blown crisis. Hospitals are packed, they're running out of supplies, and everyone's scared and unsure what's next.
And what about all those people Hamas is holding hostage? Sinwar was the one calling the shots. So now that he's gone, will those hostages be more or less likely to be freed?
It's tough to say. Some people who study this stuff think that without Sinwar, some parts of Hamas might be more open to making a deal. Like they might see it as a way to look better in the world's eyes, to seem less extreme.
But it could just as easily backfire, right?
Absolutely. Hamas might feel like they need to prove they're still strong, that they're not going to give up. They could decide to hold on even tighter to the hostages, which would be really bad.
It's like we're trying to figure out what's going to happen with the weather while there's a hurricane going on. Like, you know something big is coming, but you have no clue which way it's going to go.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Right now, everyone's talking about peace talks and what happens next for Hamas. But can you really talk about peace when there's still so much fighting going on?
It almost feels kind of naive, right? But then again, what else are we supposed to do? Just sit back and watch more people suffer more, fighting more families torn apart because of all of this.
This cycle of violence has been going on for way too long in that part of the world. And while Sinwar dying might seem like a turning point, we have to be careful about saying one side won or lost because of it.
Yeah, because any win in this situation just feels like everyone loses, especially the people stuck in the middle of it.
You got it. There's no way to measure how much damage this conflict has caused. And it's not just about the people who have died. It's the trauma, the families who have lost their homes, the kids who are growing up surrounded by war.
We've talked about what Sinwar's death means for the governments, what might happen with Hamas, whether or not there will peace talks. But what does it all really mean? For someone like me who's listening to this, trying to understand this really complicated situation, what's the bottom line?
I think the most important thing to remember is this. Sinwar's death changes a lot of things. There's no doubt about that. But it's not the end. It doesn't fix everything. If anything, it makes things even more uncertain in a situation that was already really unstable.
So what do we do now?
We keep paying attention, keep listening, and most importantly, we keep asking questions. We can't just ignore the news reports, the numbers, the videos of what's happening over there. We have to remember that behind all of that are real people whose lives are being torn apart by this.
That's a heavy thought. But you're right, this isn't some game being played by politicians. This is real life with real families and real people caught in the middle of a war that's been going on for decades.
And even though we don't know what's going to happen, one thing's for sure. The only way to get real peace is by talking to each other, understanding each other, and being willing to break out of this cycle of violence that has been going on for far too long.
That's a big challenge, but that's why it's so important to keep trying. Thanks for being here with us for this deep dive. It was a tough one, but really important.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.